Committee for the 5th of November. This is our second consecutive week seeing each other, so nice to see you all again. We are today going to be going through one item of business, but just as a reminder, this is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and please do remember to use your microphone and cameras. This is particularly important today because we have a number of online participants. I'm now going to pass over to Jonathan to confirm apologies and substitution.
Thanks, Chair. So we've only received apologies from Councillor Stairs and no substitutions.
Thank you very much. I now move to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any matters which anyone wishes to declare? Councillor Ottino.
I'm on the licensing committee and we discussed all this and made recommendations. And I think subsequently I might also have received a letter from an email from Coulter saying they were happy with the decision that licensing committee made, I think. But I've been told that's okay to be here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miles. Thank you very much, Councillor Jarvis.
I don't think I need to declare this, but as Councillor Martino did, I've also received correspondence from Coulter, so just to put that on the record if that's required.
For the sake of completeness, I will also say I've received some correspondence from Coulter. Councillor Altaf Khan.
Well, correspondence or talk or this campaign of Coulter is all year round, so I don't think it's much of a declaration here, because whenever you walk out and you see some black cab driver and they stop you and they start talking about it. So apart from that, I don't have anything to do with it.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I'm not sure that is something we formally need to declare, but I think it's worth putting it on the record nonetheless. Was there any further declarations? I am seeing none. I shall move to Chair's announcement. There are none. So we'll now move to approving the minutes of the previous meetings, plural. So firstly, we have the meeting of the 14th of October. That was our last ordinary meeting. I shall assume everyone's had a chance to look at the minutes in advance. Is everyone happy to confirm them as an accurate record? Yeah, please. I see that as unanimous. Thank you very much. And then we have the 5th of November special meeting, which was supplied as a late supplement. Again, is everyone happy to approve those as an accurate record? Thank you. We would now move to addresses by members of the public. I am not aware of any. We now move to councillor addresses on any item for discussion. We had advance notice from Councillor Muddyman, but she does not seem to be present. She was going to address online. So I think in that case, we shall have to move forward. So we'll move now to the substantive item, and I will invite Councillor Railton, Richard Adams, Anna Dimitriou, Joshua Cunrow and Emma Jackman to present the item. I leave open to you which order you wish to do that in. But yes, I think Jonathan advises me. I think Emma, you were going to begin.
I am, thank you. So it's not usual for your monitoring officer to present you a licensing report, but there are reasons behind it. As was mentioned earlier in the meeting, the matter was considered by the licensing committee and they made a recommendation to council. The report sets out in some detail, essentially, there was some confusion around decision making and we sought advice from council, and council has confirmed that though it was always council's intention that full council retain decision making on licensing policy, because we didn't have an explicit recommendation to council that stated that, even though it was in every copy of the constitution that was approved, it therefore defaulted under the legislation due to the operation of some case law that it be a cabinet decision. That meant that though the committee took the decision to delay the operation of the emissions policy and refer it to council for that decision, we couldn't then take it on to council. We are proposing on the 24th at the council meeting to get that explicit statement from council and ensure that going forward, council does retain the decision making around approval of licensing policy. However, in the interim, because there is a need to
just for the benefit of anyone watching, we seem to have
confirm the
lost
position due to the determined to take it to cabinet in line with council's advice so that they can take the decision. Yeah. Sorry, did you?
Sorry, Emma, we lost your connection for a minute.
Okay. So we are determining to take it to cabinet in order that the decision can be taken and we can have certainty around the position. So that's the thrust of the introduction to the report. The remainder of the report is then essentially a slightly condensed version of what was before licensing committee. The thrust of it the same. There's just some small parts that have been reviewed and removed. Nothing of note in terms of the decision making, just some background information, which is referred to in the background papers part of the report. So if there are any questions on that element of the report, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I'm happy to pass over to Richard and Josh, who will be able to answer any technical questions in respect of the licensing position.
Thank you, Emma. Just, I think because of where we lost you, I couldn't fully follow the thrust, and I think that might be true of the rest of the committee as well. Would it be possible for you to just repeat the section on sort of the relationship to future full council and why it's before cabinet this time? Because I think that's where you sort of cut out. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. So council's advice was that essentially it wasn't possible for council to take the decision because we didn't have that explicit decision by council that it would retain the decision making, and therefore the legislation means that it defaults to cabinet. Due to the sort of need to get some certainty around this for Hackney carriage drivers, we are taking this to cabinet just from a timing point of view to get the decision, because cabinet comes before council, with the intention that council will make that explicit resolution on the 24th to reserve all future decisions on licensing policy in relation to taxis to itself. So that should then essentially ratify what has commonly been the position under the Constitution, that council is responsible for taking that onward recommendation from committee.
Thank you very much. Were there any questions members wish to raise for Emma at this time? I see Councillor Altaf Khan, Councillor Miles and Councillor Razad. Can we go in that order, please? And Emma, I'll take all three questions unless they're overly long and then come back to you.
I think before we go to the report, this issue need to be very, very clearly thrashed out with the legals on this. So what I am understood that the report was pulled from going to full council on last minute. And now what I'm understanding, there is a legislation which folds back the position that it should go to the cabinet. Previously, all the decision, and as said, according to Constitution, it goes to full council. Now, is this legislation which we found, is it new recently, which wasn't there before? Or if it was before, why wasn't followed before? Why this was going through full council, and now we're trying to bring this back to the cabinet and bringing this legislation? To be honest, and I have to be very, very open, I've told my group leader that I will speak up this very clearly. It doesn't matter if it goes live, it goes live. It doesn't give a good impression of administration. It raises 10 millions of questions, and especially when it comes to the taxi business, they are the face and mouth of the community, and you hear so many other things as well. So this is how it will bring this council and this administration not in a good reputation. So my question is this legislation which brought over to this process, was this new, or if it was there before? And that means that last year when it came to full council, when the full council gave 1 year extension, now it is cabinet who's going to make the decision. So which process is wrong and right? And my supplement question to that, whatever answer is, whether that process was right or wrong, and one of the process is right and one of them is wrong. And who is responsible for this? And if the last time was wrong and this time is right, then who is going to take that responsibility? And I would like and see a openly apology of misleading and misguiding or running administration this way, because you can't 1 minute it goes to full council, next year it goes back to the cabinet because the legislation says. So that need to be very, very clearly clarified here. Because I have some background, other information I heard, which I think maybe it will bring very, very badly to this administration, because I do see some politics behind it. I do see some other reasons of doing this way. So please explain this properly in a very simple words and simple English.
Thank you very much. I think in light of the length of the question, I'm minded to go back to Emma first. But the one thing I will remind members of is that a portion of the agenda is something that would require us to go into closed session. So if you think that your question might fall the other side of that line, please do indicate before asking it so that we can do that. Emma, if I go back to you.
Yep, that's fine. So the legislation is not new. It's not about whether we followed the legislation or not. Essentially, it comes down to, we adopted our constitution and these provisions probably back in circa 2000 when we were required to have a constitution. At that time, we followed the law, which states it can either be a decision that cabinet take, or it can be a decision that council take, and it's up to the local authority to decide. Since we adopted the constitution, there was a case that was determined that didn't centre solely around this issue, but it was an element of it. And that case determined that where council decides to keep the licensing function on taxis specifically to itself, it needs to make a clear statement that it wishes to do so. Now, it doesn't go any further than that. The advice we've had is that approving the constitution year on year, where council is saying they want to keep the function, wouldn't be sufficient. What we would need is a statement in a recommendation. That, given that this arose from case law, so it's not a problem with the legislation, it is just a nuance of case law, and a sort of quite remote case. This wasn't picked up at the point that the case was decided, because it wasn't a particularly big case in terms of decision making and local government authority, local government, etc. So it's not that the law hasn't been followed, it's that there is some debate as to whether there is a clear enough statement, and council's erred on the side that without a recommendation in the report that adopted the constitution that explicitly dealt with this, it, in his view, it defaults to cabinet.
Thank you.
I will answer the second part, but is there any further question on that before I continue?
Yes,
my follow-up was, so is this going to be whenever we want to go back to council or stay with the cabinet, or this is the going to be route? Because by doing this, as I said, is a lot of controversy and suspicion is being created already. And I'm not very comfortable, to be honest. And the reason I came here to air all these views, we're not going to make decision. This is just a formality, because the cabinet is making decision. There's already a recommendation from officers out there. We all know what is the outcome. And I've told one of my colleagues, and he laughed, that one of the dictator hold the election, and he said, before the election happens, I can see the results because it was on the direction of that dictatorship. So I can see the results of this report at the end. I know without cabinet happening, I know what will happen. It is already out in the community. So that this is where the question mark come to this decision making or the council running process. So only to clarify, I know you're not in position to say what is the outcome or how the cabinet is taking. That's my view, and this is how I see politically what is happening here. But from the legal point of view, is this going to be always licensing committee and recommendations to the cabinet, or it will go back to, because it was a small case law tripped this, there may be something else, it may go back to council, or where is our position for the future wise?
So the report, oh, sorry, Chair.
That's okay. I was just going to say, obviously that first question around the nature of the way in which it's going to proceed. If there are any other questions about that, can we get those in now so we can all have clarity about where the decision making will lie in future, and then we can move on to the specifics of this decision. I just don't want to get us into a back and forth between one member and the officer. Councillor Miles, is yours on this exact point? Sorry, Emma, I'll come back to you. Do you want to come in here?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Emma, and also for clarifying the rules, because clearly, as we know from scrutiny, there have been a few things that have been needing to tighten up, and we appreciate your efforts on that. Obviously, it's disappointing that we've been following the wrong process. And what my question is around how then, subject to this, full council, if it does agree then that they will be responsible for taxi licensing matters as the ultimate decision rather than cabinet on this occasion, how will that then change the responsibilities and with the general purpose licensing committee? And I'd like to give a very practical example of where we've had an issue with this before. When a motion was put forward around a street trading issue, which was therefore the responsibility under general purpose of the full council, we weren't even allowed to debate the motion, and it was withdrawn from the agenda at a moment's notice. And I remember this very well because I had a newborn baby and I spent a lot of time trying to prepare for my speech on this, and I wasn't even allowed to have the time to debate it. I was extremely angry because, when you have very little sleep at night and you've got a newborn baby, you could have been doing better things rather than playing party politics. So the case with that was we were told, no, nothing could be debated on this topic at all, or anything related to general purpose licensing at the street trading at full council, because it had to be discussed at the committee level first. So does that therefore mean we're not allowed to discuss anything related to taxis at full council? It has to always go first of all through the subcommittee and then get debated, because that affects the council being able to vote on any motions related to any topic related to either taxis or any other general purpose licensing matter, which is greatly concerning because it's a very small group of people that will be controlling that. And as we discovered with our last debate, we weren't even allowed to put forward the reasons against what was the ultimate decision of the vote in the previous licensing meeting, because it was moved straight to a vote rather than a full debate. So this is what is a real concern. So could you clarify that process then, that relationship between and what then that scope is going to be? Is it just going to be related to taxis or all the scope of the general purpose licensing agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Emma, please do come back to those now. Apologies for cutting in. I just don't want us to get into a situation where we have just one flow of questions.
No, that's fine. So each area of licensing has its own specific legislation, and what this is focusing on and what the advice was around was specifically taxes. That's because there's some regulations that tell local authorities who can take what decisions. So it'll tell you if cabinet can do it, it'll tell you if council can do it, or it'll tell you if it's a local choice, i.e. you can choose between cabinet and council. In this case, taxi licensing, where it's an individual application, is reserved to the committee itself. So the committee must take those decisions. It can't be taken by council and it can't be taken by cabinet. What we're looking at here is just the policy that relates to taxi licensing. And so currently in the Constitution, that states that the General Purposes Licensing Committee will consider that policy in draft format on recommendation for officers and will make a recommendation to council. there is no proposal to change that. So what we will be doing is asking council to ratify that, get that explicit statement. So that means there's no ambiguity in terms of the application of the regulations. So the intention is, and has always been, that council takes it. It's just that because of this advice that we've got, it's cast doubt on whether we have taken an explicit enough decision in the past, so probably around 2020, and therefore his view is that it says until we do otherwise, it's a matter for cabinet because it's not explicit enough. In terms of then council debating it, if there's a report before council, it is open to debate. When the committee consider it, yes, they debate it, yes, they consider it, but it's about a recommendation to council. Council is still the decision makers. They can debate that. They can, take an alternative decision to the committee should they wish. It's still the same principles still apply to council as would apply to the committee in terms of what your duty is as licensing authority. And some of those are touched on in the report, but essentially it would be like any other decision before council. There's the opportunity for members to debate it, and then there should be the opportunity to vote it and make a decision. So just to reiterate, we're not proposing that this decision comes away from council. We wouldn't be bringing this particular decision in this paper to cabinet were it not for the time constraints in terms of the potential impact on hackney carriages, simply because committee have given a clear steer. This is due to come in the new year. If we left it a further 2 weeks, it's leaving, should the decision be taken to extend it, then it's only giving them a short time in terms of compliance. So it's getting a decision, whatever that might be from an officer's point of view, at the earliest possible opportunity, which is why it's going to cabinet rather than waiting the additional week and a bit to go to council. I just touching on some of the things that Councillor Khan raised, I can stress there's no political input behind this. It really genuinely is an issue in terms of the nuances of local government law and the interpretation. It comes down to the fact that there was a case which wasn't picked up at the time and hasn't been reflected in our decision-making process. The process we've continued to follow could arguably still be correct. Council is not saying the process we followed is wrong in terms of getting council to approve the constitution and it's contained within there. What he's saying is, on balance, he feels that it's not clear enough and therefore it's reserved to cabinet. And we want to just make sure that we've got a really sound decision-making, robust process in place, which is why we're dealing with it in the way that we are.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to go back to Councillor Miles in just a second, but just so I've got clarity. So it is the case that the decision this time needs to go to cabinet because it needs to be done quickly, and because of that seems to be at least the most safe interpretation of where the case law sits. But in future, we intend to bring it to full council. Is that just a correct lay of the land?
Yeah, that is a very good summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Miles for her follow-up.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. So, I mean, clearly the process that was followed previously was the incorrect process where we were denied the opportunity to debate a motion which related to the committee. So that's good to know that that process wasn't followed before, and it should have been, because we were very angry about that, as you can imagine at the time. But thank you for your reassurance. And I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is there is nothing to stop members of council bringing a motion that relates to taxi policy. For instance, we might have a policy that has steps to incentivize female drivers, or I don't even know what it was, but like something hypothetical. But like, if there were policy matters that were debated at full council, that wouldn't be automatically pushed to the subcommittee, or the committee rather. We could still have motions and debate them without it being automatically pushed. Just want to get that confirmation.
Yeah, in the same way that we've had motions on the local plan before, I don't want to suggest it's that simplistic. Obviously, you'd always need to have licensing officer input, recommendation, it need to have your legal advice around it. So it's not as clear as a motion could be put and voted on and it is in, that's it, it's done and dusted and in place. But then we'd always pick that up when the motion's submitted. So it's slightly more nuanced, but essentially what council can't do is deal with individual licenses. Cannot. What it is responsible for under the Constitution and what we're asking it to ratify is that it's responsible for taxi licensing policy.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions members wish to raise for Emma? I am seeing none. So just in terms of order, obviously Councillor Muddyman was not able to join us when we were at the councillor addresses on items for discussion point on the agenda, but having now heard the section relating to why this decision has gone to Cabinet, I am going to go back to Councillor Muddyman and invite her to make her submissions before the committee. I will then go to the licensing officers and the Cabinet member. So apologies for the delay. Councillor Muddyman, I hope you can hear us. Can you?
I can, thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very
Just
much for your patience.
One second there as well, just to say you've got 5 minutes and there may be questions from the committee for you. So please do have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. I'm in deepest, darkest Northumberland, and the internet connection is not great, but thank you. So I've been told that I'm not allowed to speak about my concerns about the process, a lot of which you have just debated. So so I will pass that over. And I've also been told I'm not allowed to speak about the fact that this wasn't actually debated in the meeting because there was a move to take it straight to a vote, which we think was probably incorrect. So I'm not allowed to talk about any of that, which was quite a lot of the things I wanted to say. So two process issues to one side. I'm going to focus simply on the actual fact of the decision, which is obviously, as you understand, to push back and delay even further the decision to ensure that all our Hackney carriage cabs move to a electric, which was, as you already know, I'm sure, which should have been happening in January 25. At licensing committee previously, we agreed to push it back to January 26. And with this decision, we are effectively pushing it into the long grass because it's been linked to the date is not clear. The date is being linked to the local government reorganisation, which is unclear. There is no definite date now as to when we will insist that our Hackney carriages are electric. So I feel very strongly that we have pushed this too far into the future and that it should absolutely be we should be delaying it for a year. And that was one of the options on the table at the meeting. So I have to say, I have bigger concerns about the process that we went through on multiple fronts, but on the actual issue in front of us, I would strongly recommend that we don't delay this and push it down into the long grass with a very indefinite date. So I would ask you to look at the wording of the decision and perhaps see if there's a way to sort of firm that up a little bit, because at the moment we have no definite date. And I personally, as chair of the committee, would have liked to have seen it actually only delayed by a further year. I completely understand, and I did ask this during the licensing committee, why we do need to delay it by at least a year. And that's because not enough of our taxi cabs have actually already made that transition. And in speaking with licensing officers, I agreed that actually to bring it in January this coming January, in January 26, would leave us in a situation where actually we would be putting the public at risk because we don't actually have enough of the taxis which have already made the transition. So I was persuaded in the meeting that we do need to delay it, but I don't think we should be delaying it indefinitely. I do not think that fits with our goals, for CO2 emissions. So thank you. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Muddyman. Are there any members of the committee who wish to raise questions for Councillor Muddyman? Councillor Jarvis?
It's not a question for Councillor Muddyman, it's actually a question for you, Chair. Given the opening comments, Councillor Muddyman there, I think I'd probably like clarity as to why Councillor Muddyman was told not to be able to speak about the issues of process in regards to this, given we've just spent half an hour as a committee discussing it, and as chair of the committee that was involved in the initial discussion, I think it would have been useful to hear that.
Thank you. I believe Emma is likely best placed to provide a response to that.
What was advised is that what couldn't be gone into was what actually happened at last committee, because this is about a decision that's going to be going before cabinet. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments on what we're proposing to go forward and where we find ourselves in terms of the cause of this report to cabinet. It was more around what actually transpired at committee, particularly in relation to the debate, etc. It's not relevant to the report that's before scrutiny, which is why it was advised.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jarvis, do you wish to any further follow-ups, or Councillor Miles, please come in.
Yeah, just to follow up to Emma, really, please, because it was a public meeting. So I'm just at the previous licensing meeting to which you've referred and to which Councillor Mudderman has referred. So my concerns are, why couldn't we refer to this when the papers before us do state the decision that was taken at that meeting, which I appreciate was we don't go beyond that, stand beyond that vote, but surely some context is useful given questions have been raised regarding the process by which that happened, where perhaps there could have been greater debate than there was under those circumstances. So could you just clarify that, please?
Yeah, so what scrutiny you're looking at is the report that's going to cabinet around the decision-making process. What I want to focus on, obviously the officers that are in the room with you and myself, we weren't at the committee, and as members might be aware, I wasn't actually available at the time. So it's not something that we can actually really talk to. That what we can talk to is the general reasons as to why we are where we are and how we move forward. But in terms of what actually transpired at committee, it's not something that really we can talk to, and it's not something that's really relevant to this report going to cabinet, to the extent that the process of that committee doesn't really directly inform the decision of cabinet. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to sort of explain the distinction between the two.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions members wish to raise, either for Councillor Muddyman or around the process questions? I am seeing none. Obviously, I appreciate that it can be frustrating when we don't have all of the information, but as Emma's put it, we need to focus on the report before us, which obviously doesn't directly pertain to what took place in that committee. So I think on that basis, it seems like members would be minded to move over to the cabinet member and officers to discuss the substance of the report before us. Is everyone in agreement with that course of action? Thank you very much. So I will take this opportunity to thank Councillor Muddyman for coming today and for giving up your time, and thank you very much for persevering with the Wi-Fi issues as well. And I will pass over to Councillor Railton and the officer team to talk about the substance.
Yes, I don't quite know sort of like order of precedence here, but I guess, I mean, yes, so this report has already been through licensing and had extensive discussion there. I think the reason for the recommendations sort of falls in sort of two sort of broad camps. So the first one is the sort of current state of the trade, how things are actually generally quite different to what they were in 2019, be it electricity prices, generally staggering differences actually from when this was first proposed, and other impacts such as the Botley Road and Uber. The second is, of course, LGR, and I think this is probably the more, essentially, you know, this council is going to cease to exist in a couple of years' time. Whichever geography is chosen, there will be hundreds to many hundreds of new hackneys being given licenses by whichever new authority. It seems, and you know, none of those in the other districts are black cabs. Basically none of them are electric, and it seems at this point generally quite unfair to essentially put our kind of homegrown black cabs at a disadvantage with respect to the hundreds of other hackneys which will be given licenses by the new authority. So I think that's I hope that's a reasonable summary. I will let Richard and Josh fill in probably any inevitable gaps there. That's all right.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to note, I have seen Councillor Muddiman's hand. Unfortunately, because we've now proceeded to the substantive report, only members of the committee would be able to ask questions. I do apologise, but I've got to follow the proper process. I will go over to the officers for further input.
Yeah, I don't actually have anything else to add. I think Councillor Railton's summed it up. So it's probably best that we take questions if that suits the committee.
Thank you very much. I will go to a round of questions. My aim here will be to take banks of 3. Again, if questions are overly long, we may cut that. Councillor Miles, then Councillor Mundy, then Councillor Ottino, and Councillor Althoff. I'll catch you in the next round, if that's okay.
Thank you. So some of the justification for doing this is that under or post LGR, there's likely to be a huge number of taxis that are going to be and private hire as well that will be operating in and around Oxford. And this is given as the argument for because many of them have not adopted these standards. They are not. They're going to have. There's a different set of rules that they will be playing against compared to those who are in our authority. So my question really is there precedent for other larger authorities to have different regimes operating? Because I understand like a city regime, if you've got within a larger whatever boundary we're going to have, and that's still obviously open, is very different operating conditions than if you're based in rural Oxfordshire on the border with Gloucestershire. Yeah, so what's the precedent for having multiple regimes in the future, and should we be anticipating that? Thank you.
Councillor Mundy, do you want to ask your question?
Are we asking the officer or Anna or sort of anybody?
Either would be fine on that score, but we've concluded the round for Emma, so if we can focus on the substantive report.
I don't know. Yeah, so I won't bother Emma with any more questions. So so actually, just linking up actually with what Councillor Mars has asked about the HCVs, I think it's relevant how many HCVs we're talking about. I don't know if Josh has got his fingers on the data in terms of how many HCVs there are in the neighbouring authorities, how many we're estimating or likely to get. Let's perhaps take the Greater Oxford plan, because I do think that's relevant, because if we're talking about a handful of HCVs, it's presumably going to be a lot easier to argue for assimilating new HCVs into our own system in a sort of more speedy way if we've got a vast majority of our HCVs already adhering to the standards that are in this policy. So that's my question for Joshua really on that. I also actually, just on a separate point for Josh, please, Anna's brought up about the conditions that have led to the sort of reassessment of this policy being appropriate. And obviously she's talked about 2019 when the policy was first brought in, but obviously this has been debated, last year and this year. And obviously, so these conditions over the last 2 years have actually been the same. So Botley Road's been closed. We've had COVID, we've had various things that have really heavily impacted the taxi trade. So what I wanted to know was really what material is changing now, and actually on the flip side of that, has there been, is there an expected benefit of the congestion charge for the taxi trades, given that people are perhaps more likely to reconsider their journey choices, knowing that they're going to spend a £5 to travel through congestion charge, they might as well take a taxi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Ottino?
Yeah, Councillor Miles has asked one of my questions, which I think you answered before and said that there wasn't that model anywhere. But it'd be good to be reassured with further chance to think about it, that's still the case. I think it says in the report there'll be hundreds of extra Hackney carriages, even if the Greater Oxford model. This comes about because this council has been much more progressive than the neighbouring councils in terms of wanting accessibility for disabled access to our taxis and in terms of going electric. Have you had any conversations with the neighbouring councils as whether they could perhaps rapidly bring forward so they could catch up with us? I mean, I know that in this room there are people in the same party as the parties that control those other councils. Perhaps they could be influencing those councils to get in line with us, and then we wouldn't have to be doing this. Lastly, what is sort of, obviously there's going to be a massive competition for hackney carriages, which doesn't exist now. What is the difference in sort of costs that those in the districts who are just driving normal cars that are also hackney carriages, compared with what we're expecting for our drivers to have black cabs with disabled access and potentially electric? What's the difference in costs? And is that what is basically would make it completely unfair for our existing drivers?
Thank you very much. I'll now go to Councillor Railton and the officer team for a round of responses.
Yeah, I can answer that unless you wanted to come in first, Anna.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're going to have the data to hand more than I do, but certainly with to Catherine's question, my understanding is that there is no precedent for a single authority having different regimes. Maybe Bath tried something or something, but no, I don't think so. But you actually know the answers to these. I don't, rather than just vibing it, I think I should hand it over to you.
No problem at all. Councillor Miles, so yes, your first question is what's the likely increase? You can find that in paragraph 21 of the report. It's obviously all very up in the air, very difficult with the change of borders to give some good numbers, but I've tried to estimate it as best as possible there. Single Oxfordshire-wide authority would be an increase of 898% compared to currently. 2 unitary model would create an authority which would increase by 210%, and the 3 unitary model would be somewhere between 180 to 227. So I'd say comfortably, no matter what one of the 3 options go forward, at the very least, the number would double, if not potentially go near 10 times the number for the largest model. But I've broken that down as best I can in paragraph 21. Your second question, precedent for having different regime rules within one district. There is some precedent in the Bath, North East, Somerset, one authority with 2 regimes. That would probably require some extensive legal research as to if that can be replicated or not. From my understanding, it's permitted due to it's a historic border which was permitted to exist, and there was some either old legislation, old case law, which my understanding is cannot be relied upon anymore. So because it is set up that way, it's allowed to continue. Those that have removed the borders or changed were not able to retain in the same way. Whether that's something that could be explored through LGR, like I said, would need, I think, some external, very specific legal advice on that. Councillor Mundy, the potential, where are we? Is there a benefit to the congestion charge? I think was your main question there. And potentially, that's obviously the congestion charge is not controlled by the licensing authority, and its impact, I think, is still really yet to be seen. But having electric hackneys that are exempt from charge to transport people around, I think that's reasonable to say that that's a move forward for if we're trying to align with things like congestion charges or future ZEZ policies, etc. Does that answer all your questions, Councillor Mundy? Was there one other you wanted answered? I think you also asked about potential numbers in LGR. You mentioned them, that they're doubled. Yeah. And Councillor Latino, yes, as we said, I also brought up Bath East Somerset last time and said that it's a bit of an unknown as to whether or not that's a similar regional way that could be dealt with. You said, have we had other conversations with other authorities? Again, it's not a conversation that's easy for a licensing authority to have. I have put in the comparison about what the other authorities' plans are under paragraph 19, which obviously shows that Oxford City is definitely leading on the way. And I also know that I think Cherwell District Council have only just renewed or are still in the process of renewing their own taxi policies, which haven't aligned anywhere near what we're looking at. I think they're still looking at an ultra low emission deadline of 2030. So have we had the conversations? The answer to the question is no, we haven't had the conversations with the neighbouring authorities. I imagine that conversation would have to happen with LGR. And your final question is, what's the difference in cost between an out-of-town Hackney carriage, as we refer to them, versus an Oxford City Hackney carriage? And I'll say it's significant. Having a Oxford City Hackney carriage, the two most burdensome criteria are that it's wheelchair accessible and that it's purpose-built. It's not a criteria that it must be black cab, but in the United Kingdom, the majority of purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicles are is the black cab LTI style vehicle. And the neighbouring authorities don't have those requirements for the Hackney carriages, so the price is significantly lower. It's comparable to our private hire vehicles that can be licensed, are similar to what could be licensed in the other neighbouring districts. Happy to answer questions. Or if, Richard, you wanted to bring in anything else?
Thank you very much. I'm going to go, I saw Councillor Altaf Khan's hand last time. Councillor Corres and Councillor Miles had a follow-up, and I'll come to you, Councillor Latif, after we've had another three.
Okay, coming back to this report about the omission and hold this debate, whether they should be given another year or the options on the report. Chair, you may remember we had a bit of discussion last time on the scrutiny. And I did raise this point that this is not only Hackney carriage, 107 vehicles. There are almost 1,000 vehicles in the city coming, going, and a lot of them are private hire. So if you're trying to speak to a ordinary person, that what we're trying to do is trying to reduce emission, electric vehicles, cleaner, greener, better transport system. So that question raised that you only 107 vehicles are responsible of the whole of the pollution in the city, and the concentration and discussion is all on that, where this city have a control over, I don't know how many private hire there are. The officer should know how many of private hire there are, and how far are we with those? And then you have the neighboring districts. And because of this neighboring districts, we don't have much control, but the other authorities have their control. So how much is the emission system is caused in the city? And we're only concentrating and talking about 107 vehicles. We're not trying to, in a way, I do see this very strongly. We're trying to buck passing this, not trying to address the proper situation. So I would like to know why this authority as a city not looking its own licensing vehicles who are operating in city, who are also taking people from A to B. They are for public safety, for public facilities, and they contribute into the emission system in the city. So what is happening with that? So I need to, again, some clarity on that. One of the comment was made, there are people in this room who have same parties running in other councils. So, and saying that we might have some influence. I personally, and I don't think my colleague, we have influence over another elected body, which is maybe same party. But what I can assure that my party, wherever they are running, they are better running. They don't go this one to the cabinet, one to the council, don't confuse people. And they have much better, a uniform policy, which I heard about the Vale and South. Somebody talked about the emission they brought in from next March, saying all the vehicles, including Hackney private hire, how they should be, which makes a very sense and common, to ordinary person to understand. So which is what is not happening here. That's why we're trying to confuse ourselves. We're trying to make more mud of this rather than trying to sort things out.
Thank you. Councillor Corres?
Okay. My question is, of course, I think it's a valid point. We extend this for 2 years because, and I think it's the main reason also, because the local government reorganization, and also, as I mentioned from Council Tino, is because this council is more progressive than the others. But I think also it's unfair for these 40 early adopters who have already invested in ultra low emissions vehicles. And of course, I would like to, my first question is if the council have any feedback about that, or if they have any scheme to compensations or something like that. The other thing is about of the impact of the delay. Okay, I would like to know if we the council are estimate the increase in nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter emissions with the city, particularly in the air quality management area, resulting from the proposed delay from, of course, January 2026 to January 2028. Another thing also I would like to understand is how does delaying the ultra low emission vehicles standards align with the council state corporate priorities of the zero carbon Oxford and the goals set out in the air quality management. Okay. And the other question, I think I did, is about really if they have any scheme of the compensations for these 40. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll go lastly to Councillor Miles for, I think, a follow-up on the first question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so just with relation to the earlier question and the fact that the regimes you mentioned about Bath and Somerset, I understand that there's going to be a wholesale change in way taxi licensing is going to happen anyway. Do you have any information on the timelines for that framework? Because also that clearly plays into this, as does this change in us all requiring at a given moment electric vehicles, regardless of whether we're driving private hire or taxi. So, and just connected to Councillor Carese's point, I'd also just like to add a sub-question, which is what is also the consistency of the proposed approach with the council's previous, at least, support for an expanded ZEZ, and assuming that if there is an expanded ZEZ in the centre of Oxford, it's very different operating conditions from elsewhere in the county, hence the different rules in different parts of the county, then how would this cause problems for private hire and hackneys if they they're no longer then going to be able to operate in the city if they don't meet the zero emissions standards, if there is an expansion? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Councillor Railton and the officer team for a round of answers.
Okie dokie. So yeah, I guess we can kick off with the emissions from hackneys versus private hires. So the February 2025 air quality apportionment study has all of this information in it. It may also be in this report, actually. It sort of tells you what you'd have thought, which is the diesel private hire vehicles emit more. So it's in there already. I think, if the licensing committee wants to consider making all of the private hire vehicles in Oxford electric vehicles, then I guess that will be in their gift to do so. It's also news to me that the county councillors run better than the city. When it comes to early adopters, to Tiago's question, certainly it's my understanding that the early adopters actually had access to various grants and things which were not then accessible to the non-early adopters in sense. So essentially they sort of had their they kind of front loaded the thing. They had access to grants which are no longer available to the other taxi drivers, essentially. There's also there's also just a very big difference in costs for if you have access to basically your own home charger or not, and that's sort of one of the big sort of driving costs as well. I think the air apportionment study things. I mean, basically Hackneys don't make a huge amount of difference because there's only 100 of them, and there's frequently, I think there's like 60,000 cars in the city, and sort of roughly 5 to 10% of them are EVs. Like the impact of the Hackney carriages on emissions in the city is more or less a rounding error. When it comes to the expanded ZEZ, certainly it is 100% not a city decision anymore. The county have basically decided to go alone on the expanded ZEZ, and my understanding is that all private hire and Hackneys are exempt anyway, no matter what their emission type. But I'm happy to hand over to Josh and Richard to correct me on any of that if I'm wrong. Thank you.
I wonder whether Tina wants to comment on the sort of detailed emissions questions. I know she had a hand up a second ago.
Yeah, no, just to say, I think as Anna said, we didn't have data in previous years. The last time some of the studies were done was quite a few years back. So last year or the previous year when the request was made again by Coulter, we didn't have as much information as we have now. And that's clearly showing that Hackney carriages are no longer the worst polluting taxi in the city, and that the levels are very low. We did have grant funding through Energy Superhub Oxford and also through Go Ultra Low Oxford grant funding, so enabling chargers to be put in, and then initially much cheaper electricity charging for chargers, and then also £5,000 grants. So quite a few of the initial adopters had that facility, but then a number of them subsequently have also bought electric and didn't actually have those additional sources of funding at the time. I don't believe in the Air Quality Action Plan, the latest that we've referred actually into these licensing conditions, but I'd have to go back and check. I think we were aware of these potential changes, so I think and again, it's a very minute amount of emissions. It's it's less than 2% for the whole of the taxi trade, and Hackney's all on 1% less of all of vehicle emissions in Oxford. So I think that's about all I can. Yeah, and 2040 is the city target for zero carbon. So yeah, it would align very well with that. I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to ask me.
Thank you very much. Did any of the other officers wish to add anything to what's already been said?
I think it's all been covered. Just to clarify that all vehicles outside of the city are all Hackneys. They're not private hire. They have a different license, even though they're saloon vehicles. And also, I think referring to paragraph 14, where you see the process of the phases of this agenda, effectively. So back in the day, back in 2017-18, when the initial assessments of Hackneys were done, and there were a lot more diesels, the contribution of emissions by Hackneys in the city centre was a lot greater than it is now. And I think Anna and Tina have talked about the new data that's come out this year that kind of shows their contribution now. So it's kind of changed.
And if I could just build on that exact same point, because I do have some statistics I can give you to kind of go on Councillor Khan's point about where are we now in terms of the Hackney carriages and the private hires, beyond the overall impact of emissions to the city, but more on the vehicles we do license, what do they look like? Back in 2019, one of the main pushes for getting emission standards for Hackneys in place rather than the private hires is the Hackney carriages were far more polluting. When we measure in grams per kilometre for the CO2 emissions, the vast majority of Hackney carriages were measuring well over 200 grams per kilometre, where the private hires had nowhere near at that high, even though there were more of the vehicles. With the current numbers, as we said, we currently have 43 ultra low emission Hackney carriages. We have, and they all emit well below 50 grams per kilometre. There's then nothing really in the middle bands from 50 to 150 to 200, and then all of the remaining vehicles are 200 grams or more. So the 65 remaining vehicles that need to adopt are over 200 grams per kilometre in terms of emissions. Comparing that to the private hire trade, while there's far more vehicles, currently 984, she asked for the number, versus the 107 Hackneys that are licensed. Of those 984 private hires, there's only 1.4% of those that sit in the 200 grams per kilometre or more. 47% are in the 100 to 150, 36% are in the 50 to 99 range. So in terms of looking at where their emissions sit in terms of the vehicles we do license, there's only 13 private hire vehicles that are in that 200 plus range, which is less than 2% of our licensed trade. Just to give you some of those numbers, I hope that puts it in perspective.
Thank you very much. Councillor Latif, then Councillor Jarvis, and then I have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I do think I do support the decision that's been taken, and I think it's worth remembering that most of the taxi drivers in Oxford are small private businesses, and what's being asked of them is to have quite a significant outlay north of £50,000 for an uncertain regulatory future that's been outlined. And I think, as has been extensively stated, that actually there's only 107 of these vehicles making up less than 1%, and they've attracted a significant level of scrutiny. I'm also mindful that my observation is that a large number of the taxi drivers come from a certain demographic background, and I do wonder whether they would have attracted quite the same level of scrutiny had they come from a different background. I've got three specific questions, if I might, for the officer team. One is around Uber. So my understanding is that since Uber has come in, actually that has suppressed the trade for the normal Hackney carriages quite significantly. I think we heard earlier from one of my councillor colleagues that what has changed in the last 2 years, well, we've had an extension of the Botley Road closure. We've also had the introduction of Uber. And I just wanted to check with the officer team is that my understanding is that Uber have reserved a pot of money to the tune of about £2 million to absorb losses within Oxford, and the operating model for Uber and many other large corporate organisations is to go in, absorb losses for a significant period of time, basically put smaller businesses out of business, at which point the fares for passengers tends to go up, and the pay rates for drivers tends to go down. So I just wanted to check whether the officers are aware of that, and also whether there is any initial understanding of the impact of Uber on the taxi trade. My second question is regards to the taxi trade itself, so Coulter, and what discussions have been had with Coulter, and what their response might be. And then the third question really is thinking about the threat to the local authority. So as we have more apps like Uber and other business models of that ilk, there is a threat to the local authority in terms of both monetarily, that there's a possibility that you may have vehicles accessing Oxford who may not be licensed by this authority. And so actually, I wonder whether there's been any analysis undertaken as to what the potential consequence of having a overly harsh regulatory environment for certain for the Hackney carriage vehicles specifically, and whether actually, although you think you may benefit from that, whether actually it may undermine the position of the local authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis?
My question was already answered, so somebody.
Okay. So I guess I also wanted to raise a question, which was obviously in front of us, we have a series of options which will be going to Cabinet. One of those options is obviously to delay until the LGR, but another of those options was to delay for a period of a year. So I was just wondering if any consideration has gone into sort of the feasibility of a delay up until the period that a shadow authority is assembled so that proper discussions could take place between this authority and the shadow authority. Because I guess one of my concerns, and I do note some of the points that Councillor Latif has raised there, but is that this is actually an area where we've showed tremendous leadership. And as we've heard just then from the statistics, it is the case currently that there are a higher number of high emitting Hackney carriages when compared to the private hire vehicles. So I just wonder if there's, you know, in terms of that interim position, if there has been any consideration and modelling of how a sort of programme to try and phase across to a future shadow authority could be conducted. I appreciate it's a bit of an open-ended question. Thank you. The Emma's raised a hand there, so I would
Yeah, so at present, because there are obviously the 3 proposals on the table, that there is no means for any discussion to take place because we don't know what geographies are going to be. We don't know what's going to be the end result. Once we do have an end result and that is then taken through by government, we will have a shadow authority, and that's when things can start to be looked at. But similar with planning to put it in another setting, what will happen is all the policies that are currently in force will apply to the newly established authority, and it will need to then gather its evidence and do its thinking and do its explaining as to what it then wants as its own policy at that point in time. So I think, I mean, officers may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the problem therefore remains that when a new authority is created, regardless of which option it is that is gone with, it will result in multiple policies applying to a new grouping of licensed vehicles under that new authority. So it's a balance in terms of trying to make that as consistent as possible whilst looking at our policy as well. So one eye to the future and one eye on now.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful in terms of clarifying the relationship. I'll go to the licensing officers if they have anything to add.
Yeah, so just coming back to Councillor Latif's questions, in terms of Uber specifically, we're not in a position to kind of talk about an individual business. I don't know whether they have a pot of money. There's talk about business models and their approaches to things, but it's not something as a licensing authority that we can speak to. The briefing after this discussion is all about the impact of operators in the city and the private hire, so we can dig that a little bit deeper. But it's something that we are aware of, and we certainly get feedback about its impact and the feelings in the current trade around it. In terms of liaison with Culture, the Chief Executive and myself have met with Culture a few times around this agenda, and there's a letter from Culture in the report about the impacts, the financial impact on proprietors of Hackney carriages, and we have asked for data around that. You know, we hear what's said, and you were talking about the extension of the Botley Road closure. We've seen nightclubs shut in the west of the town. We talk about working from home and the lack of business park traffic that takes them from the centre out to the edges of the city. We don't have the evidence and the data, but it's not something that we are not listening to, and that forms part of the report. So they have been spoken to and consulted with. And out of town discussions, the final question you were talking about out of town. So yeah, if you could just repeat it.
It's just the potential threat to the licensing authority from actually other operators using technology and operating models which allows them to undercut vehicles that we've licensed.
Okay. So in the briefing following this, we talk about out of town, and out of town hackneys have been an issue in the city for many, many years. It throws up safeguarding issues because we can't regulate them. And we can go into that briefing about what the current state is, maybe at that point. So currently we don't face the level of out of town issue that we used to, but absolutely there is a risk that people from elsewhere, and when we do hear about them, we do investigate and we contact that local authority, that licensing authority, and ask them why there are people regularly from there operating in the city, and because they try and discourage that too for safeguarding reasons. But there's a bit more detail in the briefing after this if we want to go into it then.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions members wish to raise? Comments are also welcome. I'll go to Councillor Altaf Khan, then Councillor Mundy, then Councillor Jarvis.
Okay, my first comment. is thank you for Officer giving these figures and comparison between Hackney and private high. And for a length, we discussed this, and I don't understand why we are so much of defensive. I did ask about this figure, and I asked, and he gave nicely. It would have been nice to attach an appendix, which Chair threw to you. We asked for this, but I do not honestly understand which information, I said last time as well, that information is available, and very nicely officer give it to us. And if we had from the last scrutiny, putting this request to put this as an attachment here, it would have made very life simple and easier to look at the numbers and the emission is being discussed. It wasn't, but anyway, verbally we noted. Coming back to this recommendation, I don't have any problem, and I make it very clear, of giving extra time. I do understand the business model and the way the Hackney trade is going through difficulties. But what I would like to add that going for an option, giving them time, give them 1 year, 2 years, whatever you wanted to give is reasonable, give it to them. I have no, sort of a strict thought on that, but I think they should be given a time. What I am very muddled up is leaving thing for an authority which is not in place, or we don't have even structure of it. And we are not allowed to talk about either, because a shadow when will come, when the authority will come. So that means that this authority, are we packing up overwork and saying, okay, leave this for next authority, leave this for it. So maybe put all the planning, other decisions for the next authority, and we should have a bit of holiday period, I think, between now and until the authority comes. If this administration is run responsibly, we should be taking the ownership of things and foresee what will happen in the future, and putting some sort of guidelines to say, for example, as I said, I don't have problem giving them 1 year, 2 year, but giving an option which is not an option. Nobody knows where is this new authority, when is this shadow come, whether is this administration or people are thinking that this is set in stone. It will happen definitely. Last time it was a big files went to the cabinet office, and cabinet member was sitting there for some time, and then eventually they decided Oxfordshire not moving forward, and Buckinghamshire did. So I know we're not allowed to talk about it, and again I find it very uncomfortable where things are being said, oh, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about this. Only talk about certain things, and honestly going for the option is already being said. So in a way, we can't really say that this option you are giving, you don't have any clue when and where is this new unitary authority and which year it will come in place. So that means we are not doing overwork, which we should have been doing. So to concluding this, I know, as I said at the very start, I know what is the outcome. I can see the result from here. What will the cabinet do? Because this is all just exercise, but it's a good exercise. We will air overview, but we know what the cabinet will go for. And so there is not much for scrutiny to say here, but I think scrutiny strongly should say to the cabinet that if you are taking responsibility of making some decision, make some decisions firmly, consistently, and the process must be seen fair and consistent. If you are 1 minute you are trying to bring something to cabinet, other meeting, you will take it back to the full council. So I don't see much of consistency here in forming a policy which could affect the city. New authority could be bigger, but again, the existing city will be in that authority, and whatever the policy is will affect or impact. So that reason, I conclude that I think it is very reasonable to giving a reasonable time for the acne carriages, but keeping things for uncertain and not talking about it and then saying, oh, you can't talk about this because there is no authority, there's no shadow authority. We can't see things, how things they are working, but we want to leave things for them. So it is very strange way of a local government working. And I never see, honestly, an inconsistent way of doing things as is happening now.
Thank you very much. Just to confirm, following the last meeting, the officer team did make a request from Scrutiny for the other information to be before us. It wasn't unfortunately possible, but that request was followed up on following the last meeting. Councillor Miles, is it brief? Because I was going to go to... Okay, please then.
So, I mean, I think we're just in the summing up and debate stage here, but one thing I just want to remind us all as we, the context of this, we've got the UNFCCC meeting in Brazil at the moment. We've got climate change, we've got urgent threat here. I've just returned this year through my day job from some of the world's most vulnerable countries to climate change. There are communities of which we are, many of us in the city are linked through, whether that's family or professionally or what have you. And many of these countries are actually at the front facing things such as their communities being displaced due to the emissions that we're causing in this part of the world. So, you know, this is the context, and we forget about that quite often. Regardless of that, you know, we're making this decision, the Cabinet will make the decision. And I do agree with the point that Councillor Khan has made. We need to define a time frame clearly, because will LGR actually happen? Who knows? It hasn't happened yet, so will it actually happen? So let's be clear on this. We have to maintain our strong commitment around net zero. You know, as I say, climate change is real, it's happening, and we have many more resources than most places in the world, as one of the richest countries in the world. So it might not feel like it, but we have to use our resources well. It's about, secondly, to the point that Councillor Khan made about processes, I think it's about trust in our system, about our rules and regulations. I was actually shocked in the previous meeting where, you know, decisions are being made around the time frame for adherence for the Hackney carriages, which were coming into place in January 26. You know, people have known about this for a long time. So, yeah, it's not that some of those affected are not going to have have not had enough time. So what we need to be clear on is around also enforcement when that is happening. And I think there isn't always necessarily trust that we are going to enforce these. That's why possibly some have not adhered to the timeframes that we have also set previously. But then also, I think what's come from debate today is that we need to have a clear recommendation that a requirement is placed on private hires and not just Hackney carriages. We've heard a misuse of many of the terms around taxis tonight. We get told in the committee that we have to be consistent, and there is this difference between private hire and Hackneys, and you know, the public don't see a difference. Most councillors don't see a difference, and therefore we should ensure that whatever recommendation we come to tonight is something that is also requested to be placed on private hire and not just Hackney carriages. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mundy and Councillor Jarvis, do you both still want to come in? Is there anyone else who wants to come in at this stage? I think then, after Councillor Mundy and Councillor Jarvis, I'm minded to move towards making recommendations, if that's okay.
Yeah, I've got a few questions, mostly for Councillor Railton. So at the licensing committees, we've previously discussed the affordability of electricity and how that has been another way that drivers who've moved to the electric vehicles have been impacted and have effectively seen any potential saving in fuel costs wiped out because electricity is so expensive. Are we in the decision that's sort of being suggested for Cabinet? Are we assuming that electricity prices are going to continue to be unaffordable? And in doing so, are we actually kind of second guessing really future energy prices? And is it also possible that electricity is actually going to get less expensive and fossil fuels more expensive as obviously it becomes more precarious potentially for fossil fuels to be used? In relation to the consultation, this was only last year, there was a massively favourable response for a 3-year extension, which would have been pushing the final date for new applicants to adhere to the standards to be January 2028, which is obviously another 2 years from now, from January. My question to Anna is, why are we not considering that? It's we're still kind of hanging ourselves to this LGR, and in terms of the LGR, I'd like to know from Councillor Railton that this is going to be a consistent approach from Cabinet in terms of decision making more generally. Is LGR going to be used as a reason for avoiding all numbers of decisions? Is Ed Turner going to give us a very short budget of increasing council tax by 1.99% and no other commitments can be made because LGR is just around the corner? So what else can we do? Perhaps we're not going to be able to continue the electrification of our own ODS fleet because who knows, the next authority might not give a damn. So I would just like to be reassured with responses to those particular concerns, please. And also, again, Councillor Elton, so at October Council, not expecting you to speak on behalf of the leader by at all, but at October Council, Susan Brown said there would be no intention to change the decision that had been made by the licensing committee. I just wanted to be assured that obviously Cabinet is coming to this with a fresh mind and not choosing to tie itself to a decision that, as we discussed, was considered to sort of not to be in the hands of the licensing committee. So just to have clarity on that, please.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Councillor Jarvis, I've just seen Emma's hand is up online, so I will invite Emma, but I will then go back to Councillor Jarvis before taking the licensing responses.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that this isn't something that Cabinet have brought forward. Obviously, it's a matter that's already been to committee and it is before Cabinet because of the issues that we have in terms of decision making. So I just sort of want to stress that from Councillor Elton's point of view. And in relation to any comments that Councillor Brown may or may not have expressed, I can't say that I'm aware of them. However, I will make sure that Cabinet are advised that they must approach it with an open mind, as all members know they should when they are approaching a decision by committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. I'll be very brief because Councillor Miles on Monday both much more eloquently than I would highlight broadly what I wanted to say. But I think it's been a very, very interesting discussion thus far, and I think there have been some really interesting contributions made, and I think I would particularly echo what Catherine Miles sort of raised as a potential recommendation when we move on to that, around clearly there has been a number of people have around the committee this evening have raised concerns about an inequity in the expectations on Hackney carriage and private hire, and that I think very clearly is something that we might want to address. I guess I felt frustrated sitting through a lot of the conversation where local government reorganisation is being used as a reason to kick the can down the road on this. And I think Councillor Mundy raised very astute point about you can make the case for pretty much anything the council does. And indeed, when it comes to aligning policies between different administrations, which may or may not be merged, or different bits of them carved out and merged, you could very easily make the case in the argument that we should just, scrap all our existing licensing policy, which people have around this table talked about as being proud about, because the other local authorities don't currently have those in place. And the exact same argument can be made on that. And I think that to me is a distraction from the issue at hand, which is what is the right thing to do with regards to the decisions that have been made around the emissions in Hackney carriages and what we want them to look like going forward, and that's the issue at hand, irrespective of local government reorganisation, because we can use that for absolutely every decision the council takes over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, given we have this hanging over us. And I think doing good things is a good thing, and we shouldn't just use kicking the can down the road, using local government reform reorganisation as a excuse to kick the can down the road and hold our hands up and say, oh, it's not our problem anymore. Yes, but we're very keen to echo when we get to recommendations what Councillor Miles already said, and I think clearly there are different potential recommendations as to what to do in regards to what we would like to recommend Cabinet do with the paper as a whole, that we will come to.
Thank you very much. Before I go back to Councillor Relton and the officers, just because I want this to be the final round before we move to recommendations, I would also like to associate myself with some of the remarks that Councillor Miles and Councillor Mundy have made. I'm particularly keen here that we don't see the situation around LGR as a sort of situation where we feel we have to jettison all of the progressive policies we have to make it easier to reconcile ourselves to surrounding authorities in whatever permutation comes about. Obviously, there will be a process that's to be gone through there, but my sense here is as we come towards recommendations, there are a number of options which were before or which will be before Cabinet, and actually the option around delay may well be more appropriate in the circumstances, and I will certainly be open to recommendations around such a proposal. I think, it's really, really important here that we don't tie ourselves up in knots, in essence, around focusing on what future authorities may do, and that we should try our best to maintain the progressive standards that the council has historically set itself. I will go over to officers and Councillor Relton to respond.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, I'll kick off first. So working through Councillor Mundy's questions. So the thing about electricity prices, and trying to sort of well, I guess more or less guess what they're going to do. I mean, the thing is, we have to make a decision now, right? And I don't think the trade would be very overjoyed if we're like, we're not going to make this decision now because electricity prices, may go down. I mean, if I knew what electricity prices were going to do, I could probably make quite a lot of money. So yeah, I mean, we can't, we have to make a decision now on the data we have now, and the price, the costs that are borne are very clearly laid out in the report around that. With respect to the consultation and the 3-year extension thing, I mean, so paragraph 23, one of the options, option B, was to extend by a year, which I guess broadly lines up with what the extension was last time. I guess the licensing committee could have done something different there, but they didn't. So I think that's probably just because it lined up with the previous extension was also a year. When it comes to the October council comments from Councillor Brown, I don't recall them, but certainly I guess I'll just run behind Emma predictably, and Cabinet makes its own decision on these things. The sort of substantive point around LGR and decision making in general. I mean, well, certainly for this one, there are other reasons as well. It's not just LGR on the table here, right? And certainly, I would sort of reject the sort of, this is not our problem. I mean, if we do not do this extension, then there is a very real problem for the Hackney trade in this city, and so it is our problem actually, and we do need to do something about it now. So I mean, I don't really see this as pure can kicking. I see this as LGR will genuinely put, if we do not do any sort of extension on this policy, LGR will create a very real problem for our existing black cab Hackney drivers in this city. So I don't really feel that it's super fair to just say that this is a can kicking exercise, really. When it comes to other decision making in general, I mean, making decisions about things 4 years in the future, probably not. LGR will of course have an impact on that, right? Because this, it is very likely that this council will not exist in 4 years' time. But I can't really sort of broadly speak, across the board that, this is just going to be a big excuse for can kicking, because that's clearly not true. I mean, you know, this council has always done very progressive things. It's always done a huge amounts of things when you compare it to other, certainly other district councils, and will continue to do so until, you know, it ceases to exist. And I don't expect it to do anything less, really. I think I've covered all the questions there. Apologies if I have not.
Thank you very much. Is there anything officers wish to add at this stage?
Just in regards to the option, talking about how 2 years versus aligning with LGR, just so everyone in the room is aware, the original report that went to the GPL committee presented the 3 options in equal standards based on time. So maintain the current policy, extend by 1 year, and align with LGR. Obviously, the report in front of you is a pared down version of that report with the intention of that going to cabinet. But what I will say is that original report went on to explain that alignment with local government with LGR, that postponement is currently the assumed date is 2028, which is the 2-year time frame. And so that original report did kind of quantify that LGR timeline a little bit more by expressing this is the intended time. I think that obviously would have been considered more by the committee that maybe hasn't been in front of you today. So I just wanted to make you aware that that was there. And although the cabinet report obviously makes a recommendation, that recommendation follows the committee. The 2 options that were presented as well are now presented in this report as the other options that were considered. I just hope that helps.
Yeah, that certainly does. I'm actually going to ask a very simplistic one-line question, which I think might be helpful. If we were to recommend delaying by 1 year and cabinet were to accept that, presumably in 1 year's time we could delay again by a year.
I think to try and give you as straight an answer back is, it is unlikely, whatever option occurs, as soon as there is a shadow authority in place, all policies will then have to be reconsidered. Full policy alignment against all authorities will happen again. And the intended purpose of this recommendation is to not tie ourselves to have to make another decision, have to go through this committee process, the decision process, the council process again for something that is going to be reconsidered at some point. And if there is an appetite there for extension, then it makes sense for that extension, for feasibility reasons at the foremost, to align with when we will be revisiting this for the purpose of LGR.
Thank you. Unless there are any other burning questions which haven't been asked, I think we've had a very good round of questions and we should move towards the formulation of recommendations. I see Councillor Rotino.
Well, I would just like to recommend to Cabinet that, that we endorse the officer recommendation of option C. This is about local government review. I'm sure everybody in this room hopes that there will be progressive people elected to that new council and that they very rapidly bring in hackney carriages across that council area that are wheelchair accessible and as quickly as possible move to zero emission. We represent the hackney carriages that are in Oxford at the moment. We represent those people. We have heard that they are going to be swamped. Their competition is going to be very difficult. We need to ensure that some of those drivers and their vehicles survive this competition for them, but also for disabled people in our city who will have much more limited options if they are driven out of business by the number of other drivers and vehicles that come in from Kidlington or wherever that are, as we've heard, much cheaper to run. So for the sake of our existing vehicles and drivers and for the sake of disabled people in the city, I think the sensible thing to do is to follow the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Would anyone like to respond to that proposed recommendation? Any views? Councillor Alton?
As I previously said, to be honest, I don't have much of view whether it's 1 year, 2 years, but what is very uncertain and unclear, when is this new authority? Why we leaving things for new authority? And just to remind Mr. Attino that your administration and Labour government is not going to maybe continue in new authority. So what are you relying on that? Why are you putting something on that we can't see? There is nothing in the place. So as an authority, you should be working with officers and saying what is the reasonable time to achieve what we're trying to achieve, 1 year, 2 year, whatever, and the cabinet should go for that. And as previously said, the cabinet should come with open mind. No, it's already closed mind. I already know what the cabinet will do. That's why this recommendation is. That's the thing is in the mind of the certain political party. And why is that? I can explain that a bit more, but I don't think it'd be appropriate. But I don't think that leaving something which you don't know when that will come, how that will shape. So as authority, just to make a decision now, say you want to give them 1 year, 2 years, officers can advise you with the business model and the ethnic carriage quota people, whatever they are asking for. So I have no problem with that, but I do think leaving something there very, very uncertain. And this is how even the ethnic carriages, people who are trying to catch up and get the electric vehicles. So with this, everybody's gone back and say, okay, we'll see when the new authority come. The new authority may bring the different policy. Why should we invest the money now? Why should we go there? And then those 43 who already invested it, they would be saying, well, why? And I can tell you another example. It wasn't city council, it was county council. Long time before this high street bus gate was put in, there was another camera system came in, and there was a licensing officer wrote to all the private hire and ethnic carriages to buy that transmitter because there's going to be a barrier. Number of people went and paid 150 or something, and then that change never happened. And those people who paid, they would keep coming to the licensing officer saying, give me my £150 back. Why did you ask us? Why did you write? They say, oh, it's because it was county said this. It wasn't us. We just passed this information. The money went to county, not to us. So I have heard, and I'm a very old furniture of the city, so I do remember what happens here. So those 43 will say, well, we struggle. They're very expensive vehicles, I've been told. Those 43 says, well, we invested. Others will sit down, wait for the new authority. New authority may have a different standard, because they have to take the bigger picture, the neighboring districts as well, and depend which area comes into the new authority. If it's one authority, 2, 3, whatever. So I think we are even for hackney carriages people, we're not very helpful here. Because if you have a simple policy and trying to achieve with certain time, then yes, everybody will work for it. But I would say that if there are this uncertainty, then those 43 would be complaining and kicking why we spend that much money. Others will say, okay, let's wait for the new authority. And I don't understand this administration or this cabinet especially, and the political thinking behind it, why they are trying to make this such a decision. So I don't understand, to be honest, and is not good at all.
Thank you. I hear that as a speech effectively against the recommendation. I'm going to go to Councillor Miles, then Councillor Mundy. If we can try and be reasonably brief in speeches, I think we've covered most of the substantive issues. So if we can weigh specifically on recommendations, that would be very
helpful. So I mean, I'd like to speak against the recommendation. I think to Councillor Khan's point, we need to be very precise in a time frame here and not reference LGR in case it doesn't happen. Too often policies don't actually get implemented they're intended. And what we're seeing is a global rollback on environmental protections and progressive policies. So what I'm hearing is we're so progressive, so let's delay. Well, that seems to be not very progressive. So I think we do need a recommendation, though, that we need consistency, and it needs to be, if we are going to be be progressive in requiring anything such as this, we need to ensure that there is a firm plan as a recommendation in place to align the requirements for private hire operating in the city and not just Hackney carriages in the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mundy.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to speak against the recommendation from Councillor Attino as well. I mean, I think we should I think we should actually discount option A because it's not feasible in my opinion. So I think really we should be looking at option B. But just to speak against what Councillor Attino was saying, I think we have again and again, and we saw it at licensing previously as well. There's often a kind of pulling together of all quote unquote taxi vehicles into the same kind of conversation. We have to remember that Hackney carriage vehicles offer a different service to private hire, so we shouldn't just lump it together with even Hackney carriages that are from out of district that are operating as private hire within the city, because obviously Hackney carriage vehicles are the only vehicles that we have where we're specifically mandating licenses for a specific number of vehicles. So they're very much under our control as the city council, unlike any other vehicle perhaps other than our own vehicles that we operate under ODS, for example. But when it comes to the HCVs, they offer apply for hire trade. This is again different to what you're seeing from your private hires, different even to Uber, because obviously not everyone wants to use an app to hail a cab. I appreciate it's difficult circumstances, but I think we really have to stick to the point that not having a definitive deadline is a real weakening of this policy. And it's all very well to sort of say, well, you can't just say it's kicking the can, but I mean, unfortunately, you can't avoid the fact that you're hanging this policy on a movable date, and as Councillor Miles said, a date that we at this committee, our friends in the cabinet, they're not under. It's not under their control. The local government reorganisation. So it's really not appropriate for us to hang what has been an important policy. It's rightly been a focus of attention for the licensing committee before and now, and I do appreciate what Councillor Latif said. I think it's really important to listen to people when they raise equalities issues and how people can be targeted, and that is a very important point to make. But I do think that this isn't just visited as because of any kind of bias or discrimination. There is a lot of interest in this. We are obviously an authority that licenses our taxis. That's one of our primary things that we have to do. And also there's also due to obviously the input of COLTA, the Licensed Taxi Association, who've rightly stood by their members and done a lot of great work and focused on this policy. So it's obviously their input as well that has resulted in this coming to licensing committee several times, and obviously now we discuss it now. So that's my final piece really. I won't be supporting Councillor Attino's recommendation. Thank you.
And Councillor Latif.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for you, but maybe some of the officer team supporting the committee. There's obviously 3 recommendations in the paper, and whether it would be unusual for us as a committee to opt for a 4th recommendation that's not listed, and I'd just like a bit of clarity around that. So I'd be grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see Emma's got a hand online.
Scrutiny can make whatever recommendations it wishes to Cabinet, and Cabinet will consider them at the meeting when they consider the report. Obviously, it will be for Cabinet as to what decision they then take following debate and consideration of the report and officers' advice.
Thank you. Would you like to come back in?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've already heard some comments as to why option A, the current policy, would not be feasible, and I think I would hope everyone around the table would agree with that. I think the difficulty with coming up with a recommendation that's not already listed is introducing a time frame that hasn't necessarily had significant thought or consideration behind it. Is quite difficult for us as a committee, I think. I've heard a timeline of 2 years, but actually that I suspect there'll be some challenges with that. So I find it difficult to support a recommendation that's not one of the three that are listed. We've already heard, as I say, that I suspect most people think option A is not realistic. I guess the challenge with option B as listed is that we think that the new regulatory authority may be in a position in around 18 months or so, 18 months to 2 years. It would seem to me to be very difficult to justify to the taxi trade and constituents on why they should, as I say, most of the proprietors are individuals who are running small private businesses, why they should invest quite significant sum under the current economic pressures at just the stage before a new regulatory authority comes in where the future is uncertain. And I would be really grateful to understand the justification if we as a committee were to support that sort of recommendation. I think, Councillor Tina, your recommendation was to support the current recommendation from councillors, is that right? The officer recommendation, sorry. And I think on balance, I would support that of the three recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Given that there's a clear split, I wonder if what we might want to do is go to a vote on whether we want to make a recommendation of option C. Councillor Tina, would that be amenable to you?
That's fine. I just want people to think very carefully about the numbers that we were given, about the number of Hackney carriage licences there will be under any of the three possible authorities. That number is huge. Those people aren't going to have those Hackney carriage licences taken away from them. They're going to have them whether they live in Kidlington, Banbury or whatever. They're all going to be down the train station. They'll have the same rights as the Hackney carriages do now. There will be competition. Their vehicles are much cheaper. There's a real risk that the existing Oxford City Hackney carriage licences will be driven out by competition, and that those vehicles will go. Disabled people will not have that access. But I don't know what access they have in Kidlington and places like that. Much less, a good deal than disabled people in Oxford have. And if we do anything else apart from option C, we are putting an extra cost on many of those existing Hackney carriage licences at Oxford, which will make it it's another factor to make it more difficult for them to survive.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Miles has a question for officers.
Just a question for officers, please. My understanding from what you said before is that under any new authority, all of the existing policies would be retained until they change. So a Hackney carriage that is licensed under this authority and vis-a-vis a Hackney that is licensed under Charwell, so therefore operating in Kidlington, at the time of any new authority, presumably, since a Hackney in Charwell district is not classified as a Hackney in Oxford City, that would be the case until there was a brand new policy. It wouldn't overnight be that anything that's Hackney elsewhere would be operating here if we're retaining our same policies, because a Hackney in Kidlington can't operate as a Hackney in Oxford. Is that correct? Thank you.
I can see Emma's raised a hand online.
It's quite complex and it'll depend on the boundaries. But in essence, the problem is not necessarily because those boundaries won't exist, and also they may cross over into different authorities. The fundamental problem is that a licensing authority will have 2, 3, 4 licensing policies, 5 licensing policies potentially to take account of, and it's going to have to consider what it does in relation to them in terms of how they compete. I would have to look into it more in terms of what's happened elsewhere, but I don't think it would be as simple as distinguishing between them just because they were previously an administrative boundary that no longer exists. So it's not quite the same as a local plan, for example, that designates specific sites and conservation areas, etc. It is slightly more nuanced. I'm not saying that wouldn't be the case, but I just think it's slightly more complex. And in reality, it's not something we can confirm until we even know the boundaries.
Yeah, but just want to I guess ensure that we're all on the same page as this, that on the day one of any, regardless of the new boundaries, the existing policies and therefore licenses will be retained until a new policy under those new boundaries are adopted. Therefore, it might be that the boundaries have changed, but those that have a license by the authority in the city under the old policy will be much like the Bath and North Somerset example, where they had their two different regimes that are operating within a wider boundary. It's not that overnight that suddenly these hackneys that are operating in Kidlington will be a hackney operating in the city centre, because they'll be under the old policy until the moment a new policy is adopted under those new boundaries. Just because this is a big part of Councillor Ottino's argument, we need to all be very clear on what the policy is. And my understanding is currently a hackney in Kidlington can't operate as a hackney in Oxford because it's licensed under Cherwell District, not under the City of Oxford. So it therefore is not accurate, as I understand it, on the basis of current policies, that from day one of a new authority under retaining existing policies, that suddenly a Kidlington hackney will be able to operate in Oxford, because that's just not allowed now. So in theory, it shouldn't be allowed until a new policy is adopted by any new boundaried authority. Thank you.
Just one point to adding this.
I think
the medicine for Buckinghamshire.
your microphone's not on, please.
Buckinghamshire. So for first year, what did I see? The High Wycombe and the Aylesbury, they were operating separately until they have a joint unitary authority. And now you see the vehicles coming in Oxford. It says Buckingham Council. Previously was the district this and district this, and they kept those separate until one policy for that unitary becomes. So I assume there'll be sort of similar things, but again, it's a very strange way of this running decision here, where we don't know how they will look, and we were leaving something for very uncertain time and period, and don't know which authority and who will make a decision.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Emma, and I've seen Councillor Ottino, I've seen your hand, but I'm going to go back to Emma first.
There are two separate and distinct points in what's been asked. All the policies will continue to operate under the new authority. So the new authority will be the licensing authority, albeit it will have to manage that under the existing policies. However, what will cease to exist are the administrative boundaries. So my understanding is that therefore, once it is established, all taxis are licensed by that authority and therefore operate within its administrative boundary, regardless of the policy that applies to them, because that is the licensing authority. There doesn't remain a distinct and separate licensing authority for the individual areas. So it's a little bit of a confusion between the policy versus who is the licensing authority and what is the area it covers, regardless of what policies are in place. And it will form a new administrative boundary in which it is the licensing authority and in which its licensed vehicles can operate.
Thank you very much, Emma. Hopefully that clarifies things for people. I can see Councillor Jarvis.
Just very quickly on that, just for additional clarity, is that the case under a shadow authority that hasn't yet absorbed the functions of the authorities that it is replacing, or is that once it has absorbed those functions? Because those two dates are very different.
I would have to clarify that point. I'm afraid I can't say with any confidence about the distinction between the shadow and the newly formed in terms of what it is. I do know that the shadow authority does, once it is formed, have the interplay with the decisions of the authorities that are going that form its constituent parts on its final formalisation. But obviously, it's quite nuanced, and it's not something that I feel confident being able to confirm right at this moment.
Thank you very much. And yes, it's a lot of complexity we're trying to work through today. I'm going to go to Councillor Ottino, and then I'm very keen that we take an indicative vote on this recommendation.
And I think we've got to be very clear. If, for instance, we get this 3 authority model, somebody who's got a Hackney carriage licence in Killington is not going to be able to operate in Banbury, which they were up till the point of LGR happens. We can't unrealistically expect them only to operate in Killington, but not the rest of the authority that might be Greater Oxford. Likewise, a Hackney carriage operator from Botley, for instance, it's pretty clear that they will be under the new authority and therefore are existing. No, because they won't have anywhere to work, will they? They got their license. No, I don't think we have been told that. They've got their license. They will still have a Hackney carriage license. They'll be in a new authority.
I do think from Emma's indication there is some ambiguity as to when they would be in the same authority. So I think we have to be clear on that it's possible that we would say they were in the same authority when the full authority exists, but that might be several years down the line.
They clearly won't be in Banbury, will they?
Sorry, Chair, I thought the officer advice was clear that we can't make that distinction between a shadow authority and a full authority. And I think we may, members of the committee may be jumping to conclusions. That may transpire to be true, but may not. And the officer advice was that actually, without seeking further clarification, that may not be a wise assumption to assume.
That was my understanding as well, which was what I was trying to put across, but apologies if it didn't come across that way. Emma.
A quick Google. So please do understand I've Googled it. But my understanding is that the Shadow Authority will be taking the preparatory steps for overtaking the administration once it becomes vested. And therefore, it doesn't take over directly the responsibility for licensing from the day in which it's formed, but it does take over the sort of decision making with regards to the planning and preparation for the formation of the new unitary, which will then take over the licensing function.
Thank you very much for giving further clarity there, Emma. Are there any other urgent clarifications we need, or shall we go to a vote on Councillor Ottino's recommendation? Was that a hand?
It's not a question, so if you're only taking questions, I'll...
Is it extremely brief?
I can be. I think, given what we've just heard, I think that the point as to the nebulousness of the date of option C has become extremely clear, that option C is clearly, demonstrably, a case of kicking the can down the road. And it isn't the case that we're looking at this potentially coming in at the formation of a shadow authority with elections due in 2028, but we're looking at this potentially coming in much, much, much later down the line at an undisclosed date. To me, it would be irresponsible as authority to be doing that. So I would strongly urge us to recommend against.
Thank you. I'm going to let Emma respond to that, and Councillor Latif again, if it's extremely brief, and that will be the absolute last time anyone's coming in on this. Emma, please.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it doesn't become the licensing authority, but it will have a shadow council and a shadow cabinet, and they will have certain powers and make certain directions, which the constituent parts, the authorities that still exist, will need to undertake at their direction. It's why it's too complicated to really give a definitive answer. But the point being is that the shadow authority will have some say, albeit the remaining authorities until vesting will remain the licensing authority, though there will be a degree of direction by the shadow authority.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Latif.
Yeah, I was just going to say in response to Councillor Jarvis's thoughts, I don't know, I was going to say how you would look the 107 proprietors in the eye, but it's probably like 67 because 40 of them are already switched, and say, we're asking you to make an investment which we know won't apply at some stage in the future to alternative Hackney carriages at some point. So I do think that ambiguity makes it very difficult to support a recommendation which is time limited. And I think what we have all been grappling with is the uncertainty. And I think we can grapple with that. But when you're having to invest over £50,000 as a small business, I think I think that's unfair.
Thank you very much. So I think
On point of order, I don't think we should be voting here because I think we should be just showing our concerns. And as I said, the decision is already made. And why we wasting here time? I know what the outcome is. What Councillor Ottino said, the cabinet will go for option C. There's no doubt and if and buts about it. So we showed our concern, and that should go to the cabinet. There's a number of people showed this concern. Rather than this voting down and voting, what will that achieve? Whether if we vote down or vote for, outcome at the end is still same. So
Thank you. So I think obviously we are the Scrutiny Committee. It is our function as a critical friend to Cabinet to make recommendations, and irrespective of anyone's views on what may or may not happen at Cabinet, we are going to do that function. So we are going to take a vote on this. Therefore, can I see everyone who is in favour of Councillor Ottino's proposal that we recommend supporting the preferred option, which is option C? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5? Yeah. Can I now see all of those against supporting option C? That is a tied vote.
now
Are there any
you were
abstentions?
very keen for voting, and now you
Yes.
you're casting.
You have casting.
I do have casting vote. I would think, given that it's making a recommendation, a tied vote would not be the appropriate thing to make a recommendation on. So I will use the casting vote to vote against that recommendation. Councillor Jar?
In light of that, I would like to propose a recommendation that we recommend to Cabinet option B.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on proposing option B? I would like to reiterate here, I don't think we need to rehash all of the same points we've made in the previous debate. I would be very happy to hear new points.
I would say, Chair, if you are voting and you went on that voting route and that option is being turned down, and now if we're going for option B and voting again, I think we should say that the option C is not something supported in the committee, and with the officers, Cabinet should consider a reasonable time for the business, which could be 2 years, I'm not too sure. So again, restricting to 1 year, that is not a very good option either.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just taking advice for a second there. So thank you, Councillor Altaf Khan. I can see Councillor Mundy and Councillor Ottino, so we shall continue on this again. If we can not rehash points already made, I think that'll be very helpful to the whole committee.
100%. Yeah, so like as we know, 2019 was the first time that people were made aware of this policy. As we stand now, over 40% of Hackney carriage vehicles are adhering to the standards. And what are we saying to those who've already invested a great deal of money? We're saying, actually, you know what, you've not really needed to do that because we have actually decided to kick the can a bit further along. And so, and also, let's bear in mind, Cabinet doesn't tie its own hands for future decisions. So why tie itself to this indefinite date of rather vague, not really knowing what's going to happen with the shadow authority and what year exactly new Hackney carriage vehicles are going to come under the same authority as those we've got here now. So this is all a bit too vague, and I don't think we should be we should be sticking to definite years where we can, and I think it's absolutely clear that we can stick to definite years, and we can have confidence that the council and cabinet will listen to the taxi trade and be flexible if that was needed in the future. But let's be clear with what we're expecting at the moment, and that's to see that the adherence to this standard can be brought in the following year. That's for new and renewal licenses. Let's remember that. That's not just January 2027. Every single Hackney carriage vehicle is suddenly going to be electric. We're talking about new and renewals. So there will still be some diesel vehicles driving around for some time after that. So I think it's a reasonable extension. It's actually the top end of what was expected when we were debating this last year. So yeah, that's, I would say, why we should ever be.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ottino.
Well, I mean, option B takes no account of local government review. There will be drivers from other parts in this new local authority who will be renewing their licenses at some point, and there's absolutely no way that that local new council will expect them to do it straight away. They'll give them time to do it, because for all the reasons that we've given people time to do it. I mean, I don't really understand the argument for B. It's sort of going back on what committees have said before. They said previously that this year would be the final date, and now shifting it again for the same arguments of cost and whatever. It would make more sense to go for A, I think, than B, if you really want to make a firm stand about this, and because the same arguments about money will appear in a year's time. You can be certain of that. So it doesn't consider local government review and the impact that all these other drivers from other areas are going to have on the existing trade.
Okay, so I think we've had a recommendation put by Councillor Jarvis. Before we test anything else, I think we should put that to the vote, if everyone's amenable to that course of action. So that is a recommendation that we encourage Cabinet to undertake option B. I think I've put that about as clearly as I can. I will put that to a vote. Can I please see everyone in favour? And all those against? And abstentions? Okay, so that recommendation also falls. So, Councillor Jarvis?
A final recommendation not related to options A, B or C, but following from Councillor Miles's point earlier with regards to aligning private hire and Hackney carriage emission standards in the future, that this committee should express its view that we think that there should be alignment around those.
Thank you very much. I'm hearing that as a proposal. How are members minded on that? Would anyone like to speak on it? Councillor Miles?
Yeah, I second that. We're not stating any time in that recommendation. We're just stating the desire or expressing our concerns that there is a misalignment at the moment, and that we think that for fairness, because we're all about fairness and equality, that's what should happen between private hire and Hackney carriage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, Councillor Latif.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect I know the answer, but in which direction is Councillor Jarvis suggesting that the alignment happens?
I wouldn't suggest we align in either direction, but you may make assumptions about my views.
I think on this one, we probably don't necessarily need further debate, not that I want to curtail it, but if anyone wants to speak, shout now. No, in the absence of such, I'm going to put that to a vote. Can I see everyone in favour of the proposal to harmonise standards? That's 7 in favour. Any against? I see 2 against. My maths is wrong. There can't be any abstentions. In which case, oh, I'm so sorry. My maths is wrong. I'm so sorry. Also 1 abstention. Okay, we have successfully made a recommendation. Thank you, everyone. Are there any other recommendations members wish to propose? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I think what has come clearly through is some degree of consensus around defining a date, maybe not the time frame, but a date rather than just vaguely stating align with LGA or LGR rather. So I just wondered whether we might want to consider specifying a recommendation that Cabinet place a date on any postponement rather than just stating until a line with LGR. Thank you.
Thank you. So the proposal is a date, not any specific date. Councillor Rowley, I see first.
The only problem I see with this is that we voted against a recommendation that there should be a date set in 1 year, in January 2027. If we go more than if Cabinet goes more than a few months beyond that, it will still be the licensing authority, but it will be obliged, from what I understood from Emma's advice, to take direction from the shadow authority. I don't want to be completely irrelevant to the stage, but I'm remembered of that poem by Cavafy. Why are you not legislating? Well, shortly the barbarians will arrive, and then they will do the legislating. I think if we move beyond the year, the date of the 1 year delay, which we've recommended, then effectively we are saying that we're waiting for the barbarians to do the legislating, or rather the combined authority. So I don't see, basically, if Cabinet is to set a date, then it can only be a date in 1 year's time, or perhaps 2 or 3 months after that, which we've already rejected.
Thank you very much. Wonderful metaphor with the barbarians as well. Councillor Ottino, I did see your hand there.
I think Councillor Miles' concern is that local government review might not happen. Is that what that's your concern? Or it may not happen as quickly as it's been suggested. So could we possibly have sort of adapt it to sort of review these decisions when we have more information about when that date is going to be? So if like after a certain number of, I don't know, a year, 18 months, there is no clarity about when that date, then, or even there's a possibility that it's not going to happen, then we come back to this. Is that acceptable?
Can I just check my understanding of the proposal? Was the proposal that we say there should be a review date or Cabinet should set a review date when they will be able to consider any implications that they are aware of, basically? So not being too prescriptive, but just saying we don't want it to be completely open-ended.
Yeah, review date. If there are concerns about the not happening of LGR or the long delay of LGR, something like that. not like that, obviously.
I would think, do you think that? I think that makes sense. Yeah. So the wording we've got here is a recommendation to ensure any policies proposed by Cabinet include a starting date and to review these once a timescale of local government reorganisation has been defined.
Or not.
or not, as the case may be. Yes, so the recommendation would be to ensure any policies proposed by Cabinet include a starting date, which is to say not leaving it open-ended till LGR, but then also including in that the timescale should be reviewed after the parameters of LGR have been defined. So basically we'll be asking Cabinet that they should look at this again once they've got more information.
Sorry, but so I understand the concern that if the LGR doesn't happen, that they would want to review it. But if the LGR did go ahead in 18 months, surely we're not then asking Cabinet to review that decision again.
I suppose This has gone green.
Oh, it's red now. It's red now.
Oh, thank you. I suppose the implication there would be that if somewhere out of the LGR came a date that was, randomly 2035, we wouldn't then want to be saying, well, we'll just leave it till then. And this would give Cabinet the opportunity to respond to any date that did come forward, were it to be a long, long way in the future. Obviously, all the dates suggest it won't be the case.
So I agree with that, but I don't think that's what the recommendation says. I don't know if you could hear it again.
So the current recommendation, exact wording, is to ensure any policies proposed by Cabinet include a starting date, and to review these, that is the starting date, once the timescale of the local government reorganisation has been defined. So basically, once we get told by the Minister what the timeline is. Councillor Jarvis, if you can shed light.
Chair, I'm not sure about that, but I guess I don't necessarily want to drag out this meeting and then we conclude nothing, but I'm not sure that phrasing of a recommendation aligns with either the recommendation of the paper that's gone to Cabinet, which is essentially to delay any decision on this particular issue and hand it over to a new authority. And that recommendation would also assume that the Cabinet is going to make a certain decision, which I don't think, A, the former aligns with the recommendation, and B, we as Scrutiny should assume that the Cabinet would take a decision, despite what some people have said this evening, that we have, as Scrutiny, not recommended one way or the other on.
Thank you. Councillor Ottino, obviously this was partly done in consultation with your, do you have any thoughts as to the wording?
Are we asking to put a start date in? That's the bit that I don't get. The second bit I don't have too much of a problem with, but I just wonder, how are we asking the Cabinet to put a start date in if it does go ahead?
Thank you. I can see Emma online. Perhaps Emma could assist with this.
Committee could always caveat the recommendation on the basis that if Cabinet are minded to extend the period for compliance, that it do so fixing an appropriate timeline to bring it back to review once the timeline for local government reorganisation becomes clearer. I think that's probably the best that you can manage. I fully understand about not wanting to preempt a decision of Cabinet. I think, with all due respect, you're just going to tie yourself up in knots too much trying to place too many caveats on it. So that would be, sort of listening to what you're saying, that would be where I think you're kind of heading towards, and probably the most appropriate wording in terms of not assuming a decision of Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Emma. I would see that as a very helpful wording that I think clarifies what was originally intended. So just to repeat, Emma, there, basically, we'd be saying, we recommend that in the event Cabinet decide on option C, they review and set a date once they have more information about the LGR. Therefore, we're not endorsing that option. We're just saying if Cabinet are minded to decide that way.
Yeah, and if what I would suggest is that officers can pull from the discussion some of the reasons that committee have expressed in terms of not wanting to leave it open-ended, etc., and to sort of ensure that we're keeping a degree of review on it. I think that's as far as Scrutiny can probably go in terms of making a recommendation that's not appearing to suggest that Cabinet's made a decision.
Thank you very much. I think that is something of the clarity we were trying to reach. So if everyone's happy with that, I would propose we move to a vote on that recommendation. Okay. I absolutely. Yeah, I will be happy to read it. I'm just going to wait for the final note to be prepared. Thank you very much. Apologies, just pending one further second. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we recommend that in the event that Cabinet approve the delay to the implementation of the Hackney Carriage Vehicle Emission Standards alignment to align with LGR, they will review this once the timescales of LGR have been defined. So basically, if you pick option C, review it when the dates are clear.
And then certain dates.
Yeah, basically. So I'm going to say we'll take a vote on that. Can I see all in favour of this recommendation? I can see Councillor Jarvis, are you voting on this one? That is unanimous. I was minded that someone who proposed it may wish to express a view on it. Okay, I'm going to assume that there are no further recommendations unless anyone wishes to point out otherwise. In that case, I would like to thank Emma and Anna and all of the officers who have been part of this. I appreciate it's been a very long-winded discussion, so thank you very much for your patience and for your answers and for your engagement. It's very much appreciated, and I know this has been an unexpectedly long meeting. Also, we'll thank Jonathan at this point and at the end. We do have a very, very quick couple of items to get through. They will be very, very quick. I'm firstly going to pass to Emma, pass to Jonathan to just briefly comment on the work plan. This has been circulated recently by email, so it can be quite quick.
I'm disappointed, Chair. I've got a 3-hour speech prepared for all these items. So, as the Chair has said, the work plan has been for the next few months of committees and working groups have been published within the supplementary agenda published yesterday. Obviously, any comments on that should be referred to myself, Celeste, and obviously the Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move very promptly to Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. There are two sets, basically. The first emerging to the October meeting. We made 4 recommendations, all were agreed, and our recommendation on the LGR was also agreed. So we are a 100% agreement rate. We are asked to note that. I take it we're all happy to note that. There also is a report back on working group recommendations. This is obviously going to be something that's private. Yes, I can see a hand. Okay. Thank you. I will pass over to Jonathan just to conclude on this item, and then I'll come to you.
Okay, again, I've prepared another 3-hour speech. Hope you're looking forward to it. So there's only been one working group since the last major scrutiny committee back in October, and that was a finance and performance working group. There was one recommendation that was related to the shareholder and joint venture group, and that recommendation was approved, and that is detailed within the confidential appendix within the agenda published last week.
Thank you very much. Please do.
Yeah, just like to draw your attention to the briefing at the back of the report that we've just discussed. I think Scrutiny asked for an overview of the impacts of a certain large multinational operator that's arrived in Oxford. I'm not going to go through it, but clearly because of the time, but I would just encourage people to read it. It sets out what our position is as a licensing authority, where our boundaries lie, and some of the impact that we're aware of, some of which we won't know about, as I said before, but it's definitely worth a read. And I thank Josh for putting it together. So thank you.
Thank you very much for putting it together, and it's very, very much appreciated. Yes, thank you. And thank you again for all of your time today as well. I appreciate it's been a bit of a marathon meeting. The very last thing is to set the date of the next meeting. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, 2nd of December. I would like to take this opportunity to thank particularly Jonathan, who is covering today and has managed to land on one of the longest meetings of the year, despite the one item agenda. So thank you very much, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you.